on this quiet winter night, as the old year exhales its final breath and the new one waits just beyond the veil. You are about to enter a tale, whispered only to those who dare listen closely. This is the story of the ghost lights of New Year's Eve. A bedtime story, a sleep story, a relaxing story woven gently into a guided sleep meditation meant to carry you into the coziest, most peaceful, most magical rest. Good evening, my dear listener. I am Evelyn Blackwood, and you're tuned to Midnight Murmurs Radio, where forgotten legends drift like candle smoke and soft stories guide you into sleep. Before we step into the mystery, allow yourself to find a comfortable place to rest. Lie down slowly, letting your body sink into the mattress beneath you. Feel the weight of the blankets, warm and calming, wrapping around you like a gentle winter embrace. Take a slow breath in and exhale softly. Again, deeper, feeling your chest rise and fall like quiet waves on a moonlit shore. Close your eyes if you haven't already, releasing the last traces of the day, the buzzing thoughts, the small worries, the hurried footsteps of everything that brought you here. Let all of it drift to the background like fading echoes. Tonight, you and I will walk together into a world just on the edge of dream and memory, a place where history lingers in the snow and whispers curl through the trees like pale threads of light. As your breathing settles into a soft rhythm, imagine yourself stepping away from the noise of everyday life. Each exhale carries you further into a safe, quiet space, a place where only calmness remains. Picture a small American town at the edge of winter, somewhere tucked between the mountains and a winding, frozen river. The kind of town where every rooftop glimmers under frost and every porch lantern flickers against the cold. This is Hollow Hills, known only to travelers who speak in hushed tones of unusual things. And on New Year's Eve, something ancient always stirs. The townsfolk call them the ghost light, strange, wandering glows that appear along the old railroad tracks, drifting like lost souls searching for a way home. Some say they are remnants of a forgotten tragedy. Others believe they are omens of good fortune, lanterns carried by unseen guardians guiding the year from the darkness of the past into the shimmering dawn of the future. But to outsiders, they remain a beautiful, unsettling mystery. On this particular New Year's Eve, the snow falls in delicate spirals, soft as breath against your skin, and the world feels wrapped in cottony silence. Every step you take upon the old wooden platform releases a muted creak, as though the boards recognize the familiar weight of a traveler who has been gone too long. And there, at the far end of the abandoned station, stands the figure who has waited all year for this night, Margaret Holloway, the town historian. A gentle woman with silver hair and eyes that glow like the embers of a long-burning fire. She smiles faintly when she sees you, as though she has expected your arrival in some unspoken, timeless way. "You came," she murmurs, her voice barely louder than the snow. They only appear for those willing to remember. The wind stirs softly, brushing past your coat, carrying with it the faint scent of old pine wood and distant fireworks yet to be lit. Margaret gestures toward the tracks, and you notice a faint glimmer far down the line, a soft sphere of light floating just above the snow. It pulses slowly, like a heartbeat. You take a step closer, your breath warming the air before you, feeling a tug behind your sternum, a quiet pull, as though the light recognizes something familiar in you. "They're not dangerous," she whispers. "Just waiting." The world around you feels thick with magic, winter, and memory. The snow seems to fall slower. The air hums, faint as a dream. Somewhere in the distance, a lonely whistle echoes not from any train still running, but from something older, something that remembers the path even if no tracks remain ahead. As you stand in that quiet glow, wrapped in calmness, wrapped in winteris, gentle hush, let your breath settle again, in and out, each inhale drawing you deeper into the story, each exhale softening your body further into rest. For tonight, the ghost lights will show you where the past and the present entwine, where choices linger like footprints in fresh snow, and where forgotten souls find their way home. And as the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The glow hovers like a pale lantern suspended between worlds, steady and soft, as though it knows you are watching and wishes not to startle you. Margaret steps beside you, her boots crunching gently in the snow, and with a slow breath she begins to speak in that calm, tremoring voice of someone who has kept secrets for far too long. They've appeared every New Year's Eve since 1899, she murmurs, her gaze fixed on the drifting sphere. Nobody remembers the exact moment it began, but the old stories say the lights arrived after the final train disappeared into the blizzard. Some believed it never derailed at Tolite, simply vanished, swallowed by a winter that refused to let go. The wind sighs across the abandoned platform, and the wooden beams above creak softly, as though the old station itself listens to her words. You take another step forward, noticing how the ghost light brightens ever so slightly, stretching a faint trail of luminescence behind it, swirling like a slow comet. The passengers, Margaret continues, came from every corner of the country, immigrants chasing the American dream, families returning home for the holidays, soldiers on leave, factory workers fleeing harsh winters in the East. All of them carried stories. All of them carried hopes, and all of them were lost. She closes her eyes for a moment, lifting her face toward the snowfall, the white flakes catching in her lashes. A soft warmth spreads across your chest, not from fear, but from the deep, ancient loneliness pulsing through the air. You inhaled slowly, letting the cold enter your lungs like a shimmering thread, then release it gently, watching it drift upward into the quiet sky. Margaret opens her eyes again. Every year, the light retraced the path of that vanished train. They drift along the old railroad line, pausing where the passengers were last seen. Some say they're guardians, others say they're memories. I believe they are echoes, fragments of the souls who never found their way home. They ghost. They ghost. Light flickers, drifting a little higher, then glides down the tracks as though inviting you to follow. Your feet move almost of their own accord, slow, steady, drawn forward by the hypnotic glow that dances just ahead. Margaret trails behind you, her lantern swinging lightly from her gloved hand, though she doesn't bother to light it. The ghost light casts enough illumination for the both of you, bathing the snow in a soft, pearly radiance. The world feels far away now, distant and muted. The mountains loom like silent guardians, their dark shoulders wrapped in mist. The frozen river beside the tracks glimmers faintly in the moonlight, its surface cracked in delicate patterns like old stained glass. You walk, letting the rhythm of your steps soothe you, feeling the peaceful lull of the winter night settle deep into your bones. There is no rush, no urgency, only the quiet, magical drifting of the light ahead. After a long moment, long enough that time itself seems to soften, the ghost light stops. It hovers above a collapsed wooden trestle bridge, its beams sunken into the frozen river below. The air here feels heavier, as though saturated with memory. Margaret's voice lowers to almost a whisper. This is the place. The bridge was old even then. Some claimed it was sabotaged, theirs blamed the ice. The truth is lost, but the lights always linger here, as though searching for something or someone. You feel a faint tremor beneath your boots, not from movement, but from the uncanny awareness of standing on a threshold between then and now. The light pulses slowly, warmly, casting gentle ripples across the snow. Your breath deepens. Your eyelids grow heavier. It feels as though the night wraps itself around you, cradling you, inviting you to surrender to its stillness. Margaret steps closer to the collapsed bridge, her voice breaking slightly. My great-grandmother was on that train. She was 17. Every year I come here, hoping the lights will show me a glimpse of what happened, or let me feel her presence for just one heartbeat. The ghost light dims, then brightens again, as though responding to her grief. And for a moment, just a moment, you think you see faint silhouettes flickering around the ruined beam shapes of passengers bundled in coats, carrying suitcases, holding lanterns that glow with the same soft radiance as the light before you. But the shapes dissolve instantly, melting back into the night. You breathe in, slowly, letting that fragile mix of wonder and sadness fill your lungs, then exhale, letting it drift away like mist. Margaret turns to you, her eyes shimmering. "Keep walking with me," she says gently. "The lights have more to show tonight." And as the ghost light rises and begins drifting forward once more, you follow, wrapped in calmness. Wrapped in winter is a sacred hush, each step carrying you deeper into its quiet, magical mystery. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The ghost light drifts ahead like a wandering star, its pale glow shimmering through the falling snow as though it were breathing with the night itself. You follow its gentle pull, your footsteps softened by the powder beneath you, each movement steady and slow, as though time has begun to stretch into a long velvety ribbon. Margaret walks a few paces behind, her breaths visible in the cold air, her lantern swaying lightly, though she still has not lit it. The glow before you is warm enough to soothe, bright enough to guide, mysterious enough to beckon. The tracks curve around a grove of ancient pines, their branches heavy with frost, their shapes towering like old guardians who have witnessed more winters than any living soul. The silence here is deeper, richer, carrying the weight of hidden stories. The ghost light pauses at the first tree, hovering just above the snow, You stop as well, letting your breathing settle into a calm rhythm, and out. Each exhale floating upward like a fragile thread of smoke. Margaret's voice drifts to you softly through the hush. This grove. It's where the survivors were meant to walk through after the train stopped. Or so, the legend says. There were people who claimed they saw figures wandering between the trees, confused, dazed, asking for directions. But when anyone approached them, they vanished into the mist. You run your glove along the bark of the nearest pine. The wood is cold, but there is something warm beneath it, a faint hum, a vibration so subtle you wonder if it's simply the pulse of your fingertips. The ghost light brightens, casting delicate shadows that stretched long across the snow like soft, wavering ribbons. And then, almost impossibly, the air changes. The temperature shifts, becoming slightly warmer. The wind stills. The world holds its breath. You hear something soft, distant, like footsteps crunching snow that isn't yours or Margaret's. You don't see anyone, yet the sound continues, steady, rhythmic, as though someone is walking very slowly in circles around the grove. Margaret lowers her head, closing her eyes. The echoes are strongest here, she murmurs. Some say they're imprints of that night, moments repeating endlessly, with no one left to witness them. The sound grows closer, still soft, still ghostly. You feel no fear, only a deep, restful curiosity. A sense that you are drifting gently into someone else's memory. The ghost light pulses, and with each flare you sense faint silhouettes between the tree shadows of long coats, glimmering outlines of lanterns, the curve of a brimmed hat, the shape of someone reaching out, as though trying to grasp the last piece of the living world. But they are like reflections on water present for a heartbeat, then fading back into the rippling dark. Your eyelids grow heavier. The peacefulness of the grove seeps into your bones, grounding you, calming you. You inhale. Again, slow, deep, steady. The air tastes faintly of cedar and old winter smoke. Margaret steps forward, the snow crunching under her boots. This grove belonged to the tribal people who lived here long before the town was built, she whispers. They believed that the boundary between the living and the dead thins during the turn of the year. When the train disappeared, they said the grove tried to keep the passengers safe, tried to shelter them, but something in the storm overwhelmed even the spirits watching over this place. You listen, letting the layers of history blend with the drifting snow, feeling the quiet ache of lost time settle around you like a blanket. The ghost light moves again, gliding deeper into the grove. You follow, your pace unhurried, each step soft and grounding. The trees grow closer together now, forming a narrow path of shimmering frost. The light lowers itself to the ground and rests above a circle of stones half buried beneath the snow. Margaret kneels beside them, brushing the powder away with careful fingers. A fire once burned here, she says softly. Witnesses spoke of seeing flames long after the blizzard supposedly extinguished everything. They believed the spirits lit it to guide the passengers. You look at the stones, noticing how they seem to glow faintly in the ghost light's radiance, as though holding warmth from a fire that hasn't burned in more than a century. For a moment, you imagined sitting by that fire, surrounded by weary travelers still carrying hope, listening to the wind swirl around them. You sense their presence not as haunting figures, but as gentle echoes, lingering with quiet longing. The ghost light rises again, as if satisfied you have seen what it needed to show, and floats toward the far end of the grove, where the path narrows into a thin ribbon of snow between the trees. Margaret stands, brushing her gloves together. Her voice grows softer, reverent. "There's one more place before we leave the grove," she murmurs. "A place where the lights linger. Longest. A place many believe was the passenger's final decision: stay in the safety of the forest or continue toward the unknown." The ghost light brightens, illuminating the snow-covered path like a trail through a forgotten dream. You feel the calmness wrap around you again, warm and steady, guiding you forward. The night deepens, but your heart remains peaceful, drifting with each gentle step. And as the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The narrow path winds deeper into the ancient grove, and the air grows quieter still, as though each step you take carries you further from the world of warm houses and ticking clocks, and deeper into a realm where time drifts like snowflakes suspended in moonlight. The ghost light floats ahead with patient certainty, guiding you between trunks wrapped in centuries of stories. The branches above bow gently under the weight of winter, forming a soft archway that seems almost ceremonial, as if the forest itself acknowledges your arrival. Margaret's footsteps follow softly behind you, the rhythm slow and steady, her breath calm, her presence grounded like a steady flame in the cold night. The deeper you go, the more the world around you begins to shift, not visually, not yet, but in sensation. The air thickens with memory. The silence hums faintly, like distant singing carried on a breeze. And somewhere, barely audible, you think you hear a soft echo of laughter. Then, a child's voice calling something too faint to understand. Then nothing. Again, the ghost light pauses beside a fallen log covered with delicate frost. It hovers, slow, casting soft halos across the snow. Margaret kneels, brushing her glove over the icy surface. "This log," she whispers, "has been here for well over 100 years. The night the train vanished, trackers found footprints small once circling it. A child must have been lost in the storm. Some said the forest spirits tried to guide them, but the cold was too strong. Others believed the child never truly left, lingering here, protected by something that refused to let their story disappear." You lean closer, feeling the chill of the air deepen, yet somehow, beneath it, a sense of tenderness lingers, like the echo of a lullaby sung to a child too tired to stay awake. The ghost's light pulses, and the frost on the log glimmers as though responding to the faint heartbeat of the night. You breathe slowly, letting your inhalation lengthen, letting your exhalation soften, feeling your entire body sink deeper into the calm embrace of the grove. The path continues, curving gently to the right, and the ghost light drifts forward once more. You follow, the snow whispering under your boots, your senses wrapped in the quietest hush imaginable. The ancient pines rise taller now, their silhouettes dark and regal, forming a corridor of stillness. And then, almost imperceptibly, You feel the temperature shift again, not warmer this time, but older, as though you've stepped into a preserved pocket of winter untouched by time. Margaret draws closer to your side. "This is the heart of the grove," she murmurs, her voice low enough that it feels woven into the wind. "It's where the survivors might have gathered. Some say they built a fire here. Others say they waited for help that never arrived. But most believe this is where they made their final choice. Ahead, the ghost light revealing a wide clearing encircled by stone pillars carved with markings nearly erased by centuries of weather. Snow drifts around them, but even through the frost, the shapes of the carvings remain spirals, waves, patterns resembling lantern flames. The tribal elders called this place the Circle of Returning. Margaret says softly, "They believed it was where lost souls could decide whether to stay with the living or return to the realm of spirits. If the passengers reach this place, perhaps the forest gave them a choice too." The ghost light settles at the center of the clearing, its glow expanding gently like a breath. You step closer, feeling the air hum against your skin. And as you reach the center, something shifts. The night grows hushed, not silent, but expectant. The snowflakes pause mid-fall, suspended as though held by invisible strings. The wind stops. Even your own breath feels quieter. Then your surroundings tremble softly. Shadows materialize at the edges of the clearing, faint, fragile, like outlines sketched in silver smoke. Silhouettes gather in a loose circle, men in wool coats, women wrapped in shawls, children clutching small suitcases. Their faces are blurred, dreamlike, but their postures radiate exhaustion, hope, and a quiet, aching longing. Margaret gasps softly, covering her mouth with her gloved hand, though the sound is barely audible in the frozen moment. They re. Here, she whispers. After all these years, the ghost light pulses, brighter now, illuminating the silhouettes from within. They stand still, watchful, as though waiting not for fear, but for guidance, gentle, patient, trusting. You feel the weight of their hope settle lightly over your shoulders. No dread, no urgency, only a serene, bittersweet quiet, as if you are witnessing something sacred. One silhouette steps forward, a woman with her hair pinned neatly, holding a small lantern that glows with the same pale light as the ghost light itself. She lifts it slowly, the gesture soft, graceful. The lantern flickers once, twice, then she lowers her arm, and the silhouettes begin to fade, dissolving into drifting sparks that float upward like fireflies returning to the stars. The ghost light dims, then steadies once more. Margaret stands still, tears glistening in her eyes. "They weren't trapped," she murmurs. "They were waiting. Waiting to be seen." You exhale softly, the sound warm against the cold night. The clearing feels lighter now, peaceful, as though a century-old weight has finally been lifted. The ghost light rises and begins gliding toward the far edge of the clearing, where the forest thins and the railroad line appears once more. Margaret touches your arm gently. "There's one last place the lights always visit," she says. "The place where the train left its final trace." The night deepens, but your heart drifts calmly with each step. And as the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Asterisk, the ghost light glides silently from the clearing, drifting toward the thinning edge of the grove, where the moonlight spills more freely. Through bare branches, you follow its gentle shimmer, feeling the forest slowly loosen its hold as the trees grow fewer, their silhouettes stretching tall and solemn behind you like watchful guardians. Margaret walks beside you now, her breath steady, her steps quiet but sure, as though the vision in the clearing has settled into her bones like a long-awaited truth. The snow deepens as you approach the boundary, where the grove meets the open expanse of the valley. The world widens again, the air colder, the silence broader, yet still infused with that same quiet hum of something ancient moving just beneath the surface. The ghost light pauses at the foot of a hill where the old railroad track reappears, half buried beneath shimmering snow. Its faint rails stretch ahead like silver threads, slipping into darkness. Margaret lifts her lantern, not lighting it, merely holding it at her side. "This stretch of track," she whispers, "was the last place anyone saw the train before the storm swallowed it. People came from neighboring towns to search for it, but the snow fell too fast, too thick. Entire sections of the valley were buried within hours. They said the storm had a strange glow that night like lanterns moving inside the blizzard." She steps slowly toward the tracks, brushing away snow with her glove. Beneath it, you see a faint indentation, a groove, almost invisible, like the ghost of a wheel mark preserved in frozen time. Your breath catches softly as a chill, not of fear, but of recognition, shivers through the air. The ghost light pulses once, twice, as though acknowledging the memory etched into the land. Then it moves forward, guiding you along the rails. As you walk, the sound of your footsteps shifts subtly. Instead of soft crunching snow, you begin to hear a faint tremor beneath it, like distant vibrations running through the frozen ground. You pause, listening. The sound is rhythmic, steady, like the echo of a train moving over iron rails. Not loud, not threatening, just a quiet, haunting memory looping through the stillness. Margaret closes her eyes, inhaling deeply. "I've heard this before," she murmurs, like an old heartbeat, like the valley remembering. The vibrations deepen for a moment, and you feel them travel up your legs, a soft thrum that seems to resonate with your own pulse. Then just as gently they fade. The ghost light continues forward, rising slightly higher as the tracks lead toward a low ridge. You follow it with calm, unhurried steps, your breathing deep and soft. The ridge narrows into a natural overlook, and beyond it the land drops into a wide basin of snow-covered fields. The moonlight spills across the entire valley floor, turning it into a silver sea. And at the center of that sea, something glimmers. A line, a curve, a shape too straight, too deliberate to be made by wind. Margaret lets out a slow breath. "There," she whispers, her voice full of awe. "The final trace." You step closer to the edge, gazing down at the valley. Beneath the snow, barely visible, are the ghostly outlines of train, cut elegant shadows preserved like fossils beneath the white cover. They are not solid, not physical, but impressions, silhouettes pressed into the earth, as though the train passed through without touching it, leaving only its memory behind. The ghost light drifts lower, settling directly above the valley floor. As it descends, the outlines begin to glow faintly soft blue at first, then shifting into pale white, revealing more details. Windows, doors, even the faint partition between cabins. Margaret's hand trembles on the lantern. It's like the land held onto them, she murmurs, held onto every passenger, every moment, every breath, frozen in time. The air around you thickens again, not with cold but with presence, and then like ripples spreading across still water you begin to hear them, soft voices, murmured conversations, a child humming, a conductor calling faintly, laughter drifting through the air like smoke, not frightening, not sorrowful, simply echoes. The glowing wisp drifted toward the fireplace, where hung the largest portrait in the lodge, a woman in a winter cloak, holding a glass lantern, standing alone in a snow-drowned forest. Her expression was bittersweet, gentle, timeless. Her eyes seemed to hold a story deeper than the frame could contain. When the wisp touched the lower edge of the portrait, a faint sound trembled through the room, a delicate plucked string, like an answer to the note Clara had heard earlier. The pendant in her hand brightened suddenly, casting a warm hail around her. Te Homed. The boards beneath her feet quivered ever so slightly. Then, impossibly, the portrait began to change. Colors shifted, shadows moved, and the woman who had remained frozen in painted stillness for generations turned her head toward Clara. A cold ripple traveled down Clara's spine, yet she didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood rooted in place, drawn forward by the weight of a gaze that felt ancient and knowing and heartbreakingly familiar. The woman's lips did not move, but a voice soft as falling snow and filled with an aching urgency bloomed inside the room. Clara, return to the frozen lake. The ritual is not yet complete. Clara's breath caught every dream she had ever had, every strange flicker of light, every half-glimpsed symbol, every inexplicable whisper. It all converged in that single moment. The lake, the place she had avoided without understanding why, the place that had appeared in her mind night after night, always covered in snow, always waiting. The portrait's glow faded. The woman's eyes closed. The hall dimmed back into ordinary shadow. Clara pressed the pendant against her chest, feeling its warmth seep into her skin like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. "They," she whispered. Somehow, deep inside, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever secrets haunted Blackwood Lodge, whatever unfinished stories waited in the dark, they all began and would end at the frozen lake. Asterisk night settled over Blackwood Lodge like a velvet curtain, heavy and cold, pressing against the windows as if the darkness itself wished to seep in. Clara wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out onto the porch, the pendant glowing softly beneath the layers of wool. The snow had grown thicker since evening, blanketing the world in a muted quiet that seemed to swallow every sound except her own heartbeat. She paused at the edge of the steps, listening. The forest beyond the lodge was motionless, but not empty. There was a presence in the air, a subtle awareness that brushed against her mind like a fingertip trailing along a glass surface. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it felt like something or someone waiting. Clara stepped off the porch and into the snow, her boots sinking with a soft crunch. The path that led to the frozen lake curved between tall pines dusted with white, their branches bending slightly under the weight of winter. The moon lay hidden behind a veil of drifting clouds, leaving the night dim. But the pendant's soft rose glow cast enough light to guide her steps. As she walked deeper into the woods, the air shifted around her. It grew warmer, not physically, but in a way that reminded her of stepping into a memory. She couldn't explain it, but every breath she took felt like breathing in stories long buried beneath the ice. Far off, a faint hum drifted through the trees, like a single held note echoing through frozen air. It was the same melody she had heard earlier, the same ghostly thread weaving through her childhood dreams. Clara slowed her pace, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling through the night like a soft wind that carried secrets in its wake. As she followed the twisting path, her thoughts drifted back to the portraiture woman with the winter cloak, the lantern, and the eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Clara's mother had once told her stories about the Blackwood women, how each generation had one daughter destined to carry the burden of an old family tradition. At the time, Clara thought it nothing more than folklore, a bedtime tale whispered beside the fireplace. But now, every piece of that forgotten history seemed to rise like frost through the cracks of the lodge, pushing her toward a truth she had never been meant to avoid. The trees thinned suddenly, opening into a wide clearing. Before her stretched the frozen lake, expansive, silent, and glowing faintly under the cloud-filtered moonlight. The surface was smooth like polished glass, untouched except for a few scattered pine needles, and a long, narrow trail carved into the snow leading straight to the water's edge. Clara's breath hitched. Someone had been here recently. She moved closer, stepping lightly onto the beginning of the ice. The wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper so faint she wasn't sure if it came from the world or her own mind. Clara, you came. She froze. The voice wasn't the same one from the portrait. This one was younger, softer, like a girl speaking from somewhere just beneath the frozen surface. Clara knelt, placing her hand against the icy sheen. The cold seeped into her skin instantly, sharp and biting, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, listening. Beneath the ice, a faint glow pulsed, not bright no more than a breath of light but steady, like a heartbeat echoing from the depths. Clara traced the glow with her fingertips. As she did, the pendant warmed against her chest. The color within it shifted from soft rose to a pale, icy blue that shimmered through her coat. The light beneath the lake responded, pulsing in sync with the pendant as if recognizing it. Then, without warning, a memory surged through Clara's mind, not one of her own, but one belonging to someone else. She saw a small cabin near the lake, warm light spilling from its windows. She saw a girl, no more than 15, stepping onto the frozen surface at night while holding a lantern shaped like a teardrop. She felt the girl's fear, her determination, and the heavy weight of duty pressing on her fragile shoulders. Clara gasped and jerked back, the vision shattering instantly. The ice beneath her hand returned to silent stillness. The pendant dimmed back to its soft rose glow. She stared at the lake, her breath trembling. That girl, whoever she was, had been part of the ritual the woman in the portrait spoke of. A ritual left unfinished. Clara stood slowly, snowflakes drifting across her coat. She looked across the vast sheet of ice, feeling an invisible thread tug at her. Something beneath the lake wanted her to come closer. Something that had waited, perhaps for generations, for Clara to return. She took one hesitant step forward, then another. The ice hummed beneath her feet, soft as a lullaby, and Clara whispered into the wind, "I'm here. Tell me what you need me to finish." The frozen lake seemed to breathe beneath Clara's boots, expanding and settling with the quiet groans of ancient ice, shifting under the weight of time. The sound echoed across the clearing like distances soft, hollow, and full of old longing. The pendant against her chest glowed faintly, its light brushing over the lake's surface in trembling waves, almost as if guiding her toward the center. Clara stepped farther onto the ice, each movement cautious yet irresistibly drawn forward. Above her, the clouds drifted apart for a brief moment, revealing a pale slice of moonlight that painted the lake in a ghostly shimmer. She felt suddenly exposed, as though unseen eyes were watching from the tree-line, eyes belonging not to animals or people, but to something older, something that remembered her, or perhaps remembered someone she resembled. The air shifted, vibrating with the low hum she had heard before, except now it was clearer, more melodic, threading between the trees in soft notes that tightened gently around her heart. Clara slowed her breath, letting the sound guide her steps. It felt strange, following a music that had no source, no instrument, yet she sensed an intention within it, a message woven into each trembling vibration. When she reached the center of the lake, she felt the temperature change beneath her feet, as if the ice here was colder, denser, holding something within it that resisted the touch of the world above. Clara knelt carefully, her breath hallowing in front of her as she pressed her palm against the frozen surface. A shock of cold stung her skin, but she kept her hand there, listening. Beneath the ice, the faint glow she'd seen earlier flickered again, brighter this time, pulsing softly like a heartbeat responding to her touch. Clara leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The wind paused, as though the entire forest held its breath, and then came the response, faint, trembling, echoing up from the depths in a voice that was young and fragile, threaded with both hope and sorrow. "Help." "Me." Clara swallowed, her throat tightening. The desperation in the voice was unmistakable, tugging at her like a cold hand reaching through the ice. "Where are you?" she whispered back, a longer pause. "Then, below." "They left me below?" Clara's pulse quickened. A memory flickered across her mind, brief, unfocused, like a shard of someone else's dream. A lantern sinking through dark water, a girl's silhouette bending over the ice, her face pale and streaked with tears, the sky swirling with snow as she whispered a name that Clara couldn't quite hear. The image vanished almost instantly, leaving behind a hollow ache. Clara pressed her other hand against the ice, closing her eyes as she steadied her breathing. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Why me? Why now?" The voice trembled again, this time softer, more distant. Because you can finish what she could not." Clara's chest tightened. She knew, without needing to be told, that the she was the woman in the portrait, one with the winter cloak, the solemn eyes, the lantern glowing in her hand. The air grew suddenly heavier, filled with the weight of untold stories pressing around her like shifting snow. A low crack threaded through the stillness, not enough to break the ice, but enough to make Clara instinctively draw back. The pendant flared with pale light, its glow rippling outward across the ice until it met the faint, pulsing glow below. The moment the two lights touched, a rush of images burst through Clara's mind voices. Memories, fragments of rituals, candles burning in a snowy circle, hands clasped, a chant whispered into the wind, and the sudden shattering of everything when something went terribly wrong. Clara gasped, falling backward onto the ice as the vision ended. She blinked hard, breath trembling, trying to separate her own thoughts from the memories someone else had forced into her mind. The lake returned to silence. The glow beneath the ice dimmed again. As though exhausted, Clara pushed herself to her knees, rubbing her hands together to fight the lingering sting of the cold. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, voice shaking more from emotion than fear. The answer rose slowly, like a breath exhaled from the past. "Set me free." Clara stared at the frozen lake, at the vast sheet of ice stretching into the trees. She didn't know how to free a spirit, or even if that was what she was dealing with. She didn't know the ritual, the history, or why her family had been intertwined with this place. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever tragedy had happened here, whatever had been left unfinished, whatever had been buried under the ice, it wasn't going to stay buried for much longer. Clara stood slowly, snow swirling around her like pale ribbons. She tightened her grip on the glowing pendant. "Then show me how," she whispered into the vast, waiting night. "Show me what she couldn't finish." Snow drifted in soft spirals around Clara as she stood in the center of the frozen lake, the pendant's pale glow brushing faint ripples of light across the ice, like the quiet sweep of ghostly lanterns. The last whisper from beneath the surfacette, Mifri, still echoed through her mind, clinging to her thoughts like frost that refused to melt. She wrapped her hand around the pendant, breathing slowly as she tried to steady the tremor in her chest. The night felt denser now, full of the unspoken weight of stories long buried under ice and silence. The wind shifted, and somewhere deep in the forest, a branch cracked, sharp and clean, as if something had just stepped into the clearing. Clara turned her head, scanning the dark line of pines that bordered the lake. The world held perfectly still, but she sensed a presence neither hostile nor welcoming, but watching with patient intent. She stepped back from the center of the lake, her boots whispering against the ice, and as she neared the edge, a faint vibration traveled underfoot. The hum she had heard before returned, but this time it carried a rhythmic pattern, like a call and response from the lake to the pendant, from the pendant to Clara's heartbeat. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm settle into her breath until the cold no longer felt like an enemy, but like a quiet guide leading her forward. When she opened her eyes again, a flicker of movement caught her attention at the edge of the trees. A small light pail, shifting. No larger than a candle flame hovered just above the snow. Clara squinted. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't moonlight. It was another wisp, just like the one she had followed inside the lodge. This one pulsed gently, drifting forward before floating back again, as though unsure whether to approach or retreat. Clara took a hesitant step toward it. The wisp brightened slightly in response, then turned and floated deeper into the woods, pausing after every few feet as if waiting for her to follow. She swallowed, tightening her scarf around her neck before stepping off the lake and into the thick snow along the tree line. The moment she left the ice, the air changed again. The cold grew sharper, the silence heavier, and the shadows deeper, swelling with a gravity that made her skin prickle. Still, the wisp glided ahead, weaving through the maze of narrow pines, its pale glow illuminating bark, snow, and fleeting streaks of carved symbols, ancient markings like the ones she had seen in the Forbidden Room. Clara brushed her fingers across one of the carvings as she passed, feeling an unexpected warmth beneath her glove, as though the symbol itself was alive. Memories not her own skimmed the surface of her mind, hands carving the symbol by lamplight, whispers of a promise made in the dead of winter, the flash of a girl's frightened eyes. The vision vanished as quickly as it came. Clara hurried after the wisp, her breath forming soft clouds in the air. The forest thickened, branches closing overhead like intertwined fingers, shaping a narrow corridor that led into deeper darkness. The wisp slowed, then dipped toward a cluster of stones partially buried under snow. Clara's steps faltered. She brushed away the snow with trembling hands. Beneath it lay a flat slab of stone, roughly carved, old enough that its edges had been softened by centuries of wind and ice. Faint symbols ringed its perimeter, but their meaning was lost beneath erosion and timmix. For one, sharper and clearer than the rest, the same teardrop-shaped mark she had seen on the pendant, on the portrait, and on the ice itself. Clara's breath caught. She reached out to touch the symbol on the slab, and the moment her glove brushed its surface, the wisp sank downward as though being drawn into the stone. The carving flared with pale blue light, glowing brighter and brighter until it filled the clearing, pushing back every shadow. Clara shielded her eyes as the light erupted upward, forming the faint outline of a girl, a shimmering figure with long hair braided down her back. Her silhouette, fragile and translucent like mist, caught in moonlight. The girl opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips moved silently, shaping words Clara couldn't yet understand. Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I can't hear you," she whispered softly. "Please, speak again." The girl's form flickered, then stabilized, her outline sharpening just enough to reveal the sorrow etched into her features. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward the lake behind Clara. Slowly, painfully, as though dragging each syllable through the weight of centuries, her voice emerged soft, thin, and full of yearning. "She tried to save me." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Who?" The girl's eyes glowed faintly, their light shimmering with grief. "The woman you saw. She tried to finish the ritual. But the lights, the ghost lights, they turned against her." Clara felt a cold ripple move through her. She remembered the portrait's shifting gaze, the whispered plea, the lantern glowing in the woman's hands. "Why?" Clara whispered. "Why did they turn?" The girl shook her head slowly, because the truth was hidden from her, and now it is hidden from you. The wind rose suddenly, swirling around them in a flurry of snow. The girl's form wavered, breaking into fragments of light. Before she vanished entirely, her voice rose, again urgent and trembling. "Find the lantern. Without it, the ritual cannot be completed." And then she was gone, leaving only the soft hiss of the wind and the fading imprint of her sorrow hanging in the frozen air. Clara stood motionless, her breath unsteady, as the forest settled into silence once more. The lantern! She had seen it before, painted in the portrait, resting in the woman's hand, glowing with quiet defiance. A lantern that might still exist somewhere in Blackwood Lodge. Clara closed her fingers around the pendant and whispered into the night, "I'll find it. Promise." Clara lingered at the edge of the stone slab, the soft glow of the fading wisp leaving the clearing in near darkness, though the pendant still pulsed faintly against her chest. Every instinct in her body told her to hurry, to run back to the lodge for warmth and safety. But something older, deeper than fear, kept her rooted. The frozen lake behind her mirrored the pale moonlight through the thinning clouds, a silvered expanse that stretched endlessly, smooth and still. She could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders, the collective memories of the forest, the lodge, and those who had come before. Slowly, she traced her fingers along the edges of the slab, feeling each groove and curve etched into the stone with painstaking care, as though every mark carried a fragment of someone's soul. Each symbol seemed to hum beneath her touch, resonating with the pendant and sending a shiver up her spine. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying faint echoes of past voices, children laughing, the crackle of fires, low conversations and voices softened by time, all drifting together in a mournful chorus. Clara inhaled slowly, letting the sound fill her, drawing her deeper into the connection between the lodge, the lake, and the ritual she was only beginning to understand. She remembered the girl's voice, the urgent plea, the fragmentary warning. Find the lantern. Without it, the ritual cannot be completed. Clara's mind turned over everything she had seen: the portrait, the teardrop symbol, the wisp, the pendant, the girl beneath the ice sand. Slowly, a path began to form. The lantern was not just an object. It was a key, a focus, a vessel carrying the intention of those long gone. She knew that somewhere in the lodge, waiting silently behind doors and dust-covered floors, the lantern waited for her. Clara drew in another slow, deliberate breath and turned from the slab, following the narrow trail of disturbed snow back toward. Each step was deliberate, careful, yet she felt lighter somehow, as though the girl's presence, though gone, had left a faint tether that guided her toward the lodge. The forest seemed to lean in closer as she passed, branches brushing the air like ghostly fingers, snowflakes dancing in the pendant's glow, carrying with them memories of the past, forgotten footsteps of travelers long vanished, whispers of lost conversations, the sighs of winter storms from decades ago. Clara paused at the tree line, catching a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, a flicker of lantern light, faint and irregular, danced between the trunks, almost like a reflection, or perhaps a trick of her imagination. But the pendant warmed in her hand, pulsing once, twice, as if acknowledging that this was no illusion. Gathering courage, she stepped off the frozen lake entirely, following the faint glow that now seemed to hover just beyond the edge of the forest. Her boots sank into soft, drifting snow, each step muffled but echoing with the rhythm of anticipation. The forest thickened, narrowing the path into a corridor of trees that felt alive, their silhouettes bending slightly, as though guiding her silently. Clara's pulse quickened not with fear, but with an acute sense of purpose. Somewhere ahead, in the depths of the lodge, or hidden among the forgotten rooms and hallways, the lantern waited. She could feel it calling, a presence older than the building itself, tethered to the memories of those who had failed, those who had tried and could not complete the ritual. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint melody, a continuation of the hum she had first heard on the frozen lake, now stronger, clearer. It intertwined with her heartbeat, matching it, drawing her closer to the lodge. Clara lifted the pendant higher, letting its glow illuminate the narrow path ahead. Shadows twisted and flickered along the trunks, soft as whispers, fleeting as dreams. Somewhere, a branch cracked sharply, then silence. She stepped forward with care, letting her intuition guide her as the melody of the wind. The glow of the pendant and the lingering trace of the wisp led her to the first steps of the lodge. The porch loomed ahead, dark and still, yet filled with expectation. Clara's breath clouded the air in front of her as she placed a tentative hand on the railing. The pendant pulsed warmly against her chest, and she knew, without doubt, that the first step inside would lead her closer to the lantern and to the truth of the ritual that had been waiting for her across centuries of snow, silence, and shadow. She whispered into the wind, almost to herself, almost to the spirits lingering around the lake and forest. I will find it. I will finish this. And with that she stepped onto the porch, the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots echoing through the stillness, as if announcing the beginning of the next chapter in a story that had waited for her all along. Asterisk. Clara pushed open the heavy door of Blackwood Lodge, the hinges groaning softly as if acknowledging her return, and stepped into the hall where shadows clung to every corner, moving subtly with the faint glow of her pendant. The air inside was warmer, yet carried the weight of centuries, of moments frozen in time, of memories both joyous and tragic pressed into the wood, walls, and ceilings. She paused in the center of the hall, letting her eyes adjust, noticing the familiar paintings staring down with their solemn gazes, the fading tapestries, the dust motes floating lazily in the pendant's soft light. Every element of the lodge seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. Clara's fingers brushed the pendant, the warmth radiating through her, guiding her steps toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. Her boots whispered across the worn wooden steps as she ascended, each one a small note in the quiet symphony of the lodge, each creak a subtle reminder that she was not alone. Memories, others, memories. The ones she had glimpsed in fleeting visions pressed against her mind, like a half-forgotten lullaby that wrapped around her consciousness, drawing her deeper into the lodge's secret heart. The hallway at the top of the stairs stretched long and narrow, lined with closed doors, each one holding the weight of untold stories. Clara's gaze fell on a particular door, unassuming, yet different somehow, radiating a faint, steady glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She approached slowly, hand trembling slightly as she reached for the brass knob. The pendant warmed as she drew near, its light strengthening, almost as if reassuring her. When she turned the knob, the door opened silently, revealing a small room bathed in shadow, dust particles dancing in the pale ambient light. At the far end, perched on a wooden table, was a lantern, its glass casing dull and smudged, but faintly shimmering as though aware of her presence. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward, her eyes tracing the worn surface, imagining the countless hands that had once held it. The prayers, the intentions, the hopes and regrets that had passed through this vessel over generations. Her hand hovered over the lantern, hesitant, and then she gripped its handle. The moment she did, a warmth spread through her body, the cold and heaviness of the night melting away, replaced by a soft, tingling energy that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The pendant's glow intensified, and the air around her seemed to hum with anticipation. Clara lifted the lantern carefully, feeling the weight of the past and the future entwined within it. As she did, she noticed shadows shifting along the walls, subtle at first, then clearer figures in long winter cloaks, faces gentle yet grave, standing in silent reverence. The room seemed to swell with their presence, their collective attention focused on the lantern, on her, on the ritual about to be completed. A soft voice whispered from the corner of the room, almost imperceptible, "You've found it. Now, finish what must be done." Clara nodded slowly, though her voice caught in her throat, unable to respond. She turned the lantern carefully in her hands, watching the light reflect off the pendant, casting moving patterns across the walls. It felt as though time had slowed, as if the lodge itself was holding a single breath, watching, waiting. A memory surged suddenly through Clara's mind. The girl beneath the ice, the unfinished ritual, the promise to release her from the frozen grasp of the lake. Clara realized then that the lantern was not merely an object. It was a bridge between worlds, between the living and the memories trapped in snow, ice, and shadow. She stepped to the window, holding the lantern high, and the glow poured outward, spilling into the night, brushing across the frozen lake, awakening the faint pulses beneath the ice. A wind stirred, gentle and cold, carrying with it the distant echo of the girl's voice, now softer, almost relieved. "Thank you." The shadows around Clara shimmered briefly, then receded, their purpose fulfilled, leaving her alone with the pendant and lantern, the quiet night, and the lingering traces of centuries past. Clara's heart slowed, the tension of fear and anticipation easing into something like peace. She placed the lantern on the table, letting its glow mingle with the pendant's light, a harmony of warmth and cold, of memory and presence. She understood, at last, that the ritual was not about magic alone, nor about power, but about acknowledgement, remembrance, and release. The lodge sighed with her, a soft exhale that rustled the pages of an open book on the table, a page turning gently, as if by invisible fingers. Clara stepped back, allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection, knowing that the first steps toward closure had been taken, that the weight of unfinished stories was beginning to lift. And as the pendant's light soft and the lantern's glow flickered in gentle rhythm, Clara whispered into the stillness, "It's done." Or, "At least, it can begin." The lodge settled, snow drifting softly against the windows, the night embracing her, as if to say the path forward had been honored. She knew there would be more to face, more to uncover, but for now she allowed herself a single, steadying breath, feeling the intertwining of past and present, of spirits and memory, and the quiet assurance that she was exactly where she needed to be. Clara lingered beside the table, pendant glowing softly against her chest, lantern's light spreading pale warmth across the room. But her thoughts drifted inevitably back to the frozen lake. She could feel the pull of its icy expanse, calling her with whispers too old to name, urging her to return, to complete the circle that had begun long before her time. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the lantern once more, stepping carefully toward the staircase, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against her spine. The lodge itself leaning slightly forward as though it wished to follow her outside, into the night. Her boots whispered against the wooden steps as she descended, each creak a soft chord in the symphony of snow and wind that awaited her. The hall was empty, yet alive, with memory-faint images of long-ago winter nights flickered across the walls. Shadows of figures she did not recognize but somehow felt bound to, moving silently in choreographed sorrow, frozen in gestures of hope, despair, and ritual. Clara exhaled, the cool breath mingling with the lantern's light as she stepped onto the porch, snow crunching beneath her boots, sending tiny echoes across the quiet clearing. The frozen lake lay before her like a sheet of glass, reflecting the lantern and pendant's intertwined glows, multiplying them into an infinite shimmer that danced across the snow. She moved forward, each step deliberate, the wind whispering against her ears, soft voices urging her onward. The ice beneath her feet was firm, pulsing faintly with the light that seemed to emanate not just from her lantern, but from the lake itself. Clara knelt, placing the lantern gently on the surface. The glow beneath the ice pulsed, responding, as though awakened by her touch, and the soundless rhythm of centuries returned in gentle waves, brushing against her mind with the memory of the girl who had been trapped there, who had called for release. Clara closed her eyes and whispered into the cold night, "I am here. I will see this through." She felt the ice shiver faintly beneath her hands, a subtle resonance that spoke of time's long hold, of unfulfilled promises, of duty and sorrow. Slowly, she began to trace the symbols she remembered from the slab and the pendant, fingertips following shapes etched into memory rather than surface, and with each motion, the light in the lantern flared slightly, feeding into the icy glow, until the lake shimmered with an ethereal radiance, revealing the faint outline of the girl, translucent, fragile, standing beneath the ice, yet somehow visible, her lips moving silently before a whisper rose that Clara could feel in her chest rather than hear with her ears. "Thank you. You have found the path. You have remembered." The pendant pulsed once, then twice, and Clara felt a warmth travel through her, the kind that is not merely physical, but spiritual, a quiet recognition that what had been broken, forgotten, or trapped was beginning to breathe again. The girl's image brightened, then slowly ascended, dissolving into soft motes of light that drifted upward, mingling with snowflakes and stars above, dispersing gently across the clearing. Clara stayed kneeling for a moment longer, letting the peaceful hush settle over her, feeling the culmination of centuries awaiting, failure and longing being acknowledged, released, and finally made whole. She picked up the lantern carefully, holding it against her chest along with the pendant, and allowed herself to walk slowly back toward the lodge. Each step a soft affirmation that the ritual, though fragile and incomplete in her own eyes, had taken root and would continue. Behind her, the frozen lake lay calm and reflective, its surface smooth, still, and imbued with a gentle, lingering glow. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying a quiet promise that the lodge, the lake, and the lingering spirits of Blackwood were at peace, at least for tonight. Clara reached the porch again, the soft snow crunching beneath her boots, and exhaled slowly, feeling a gentle release of tension, a serene calm sweeping through her body and mind. The lantern's light reflected in the pendant one last time, and she whispered to the night, to the spirits, to herself, "It is done, at least for now." As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. She stepped inside the lodge, placing both lantern and pendant carefully on the table, feeling the lingering warmth in her hands, and allowed her eyelids to grow heavy. The quiet hush of the lodge, the lake, and the night embracing her in a soft, magical stillness, knowing that the past and present had finally touched, if only for a single winter's night, and that she could rest, if only for a moment, within the embrace of memory, light, and snow.